This is Into the Story, the podcast where you learn English with true stories from all over the world. Stories that connect us and inspire you to get where you want to go. Hello, my dear friends. It's your host, Bree. Now, we have heard a lot of stories about taking risks on this podcast, from climbing Mount Everest to starting a business. But today's episode is about a very different kind of risk, the kind that you take when you step outside the normal, when you go against what's expected and you make yourself vulnerable, even if others don't understand it. Maya Angelou, the American civil rights activist, once said, "You are only free when you realize you belong no place. You belong every place, no place at all. The price is high, the reward is great." Today, we're going into the story of Ariel Goodbody, who decided to try something new, stand-up comedy. But there's a twist. What Ariel was about to say was very different than what the audience expected.
I'd kind of resigned myself to the idea that if I don't get a laugh at the start, I probably am not going to get any laughs. But the only way I can leave this with any dignity is to just fully commit to what I'm saying.
By stepping up in front of that crowd, Ariel is choosing to stand alone, to belong no place. It's a story of bravery, where the risk is great, but the reward could be even greater. And really quick before we look at the vocabulary for today's story, if you want more of Into the Story, then you can sign up for my newsletter. Like the show, the newsletter is designed to be interesting, inspiring, and most importantly, help you improve your English. To sign up, just visit intothestorypodcast.com. Planning a trip? Whether it's a big adventure or a weekend away, you'll need travel insurance. Last year, my son needed a doctor while we were in Canada. It cost a lot, but my insurance took care of everything without any stress. Plus, they offer the best prices I've seen. Into the Story listeners can get a 5% discount. Just follow the link in the description or visit intothestorypodcast.com/travel. Now it's time to look at 5 words and expressions that Ariel uses in today's story. The first one is deadpan. This is one word, DEADPAN. And to say something deadpan is to say something serious or with no emotion, and it's often in a funny way. For example, he told the joke in a deadpan voice, and everyone laughed. Or her deadpan delivery made the joke even funnier. Deadpan. Next, a set. So a set in the world of comedy is a group of jokes or a routine performed by a comedian. For example, his comedy set was hilarious and the crowd loved it. Or she practiced her set for the open mic. A set. Next, to be unsettled. So to be unsettled is to feel disturbed or uncomfortable. And this can be mentally or physically. For example, he felt unsettled after hearing the bad news. Or eating too fast made my stomach feel unsettled. To be unsettled. Next, to put something off. To put something off is to delay or postpone something. For example, she put off studying until the night before the exam. Or they put off the meeting because of the weather. To put something off. And finally, to be overdone. So to be overdone means to be done too much or in an excessive way. So there are a lot of jokes and memes that are funny at first, but then they just become overdone and they're not funny anymore. Or the movie's special effects felt overdone and I didn't enjoy it. To be overdone. Ariel uses lots of great vocabulary in today's story, so I really encourage you to go to the episode page on intothestorypodcast.com and look at the extended vocabulary list. You will also find the transcript and a listening comprehension quiz. And one last thing, you'll notice that I'll be using they, them pronouns when referring to Ariel. So you won't hear me saying she, her, or he, him. Okay, it's my favorite time. Let's get into the story. Ariel grew up in Bath, a beautiful place in southwest England, famous for its Roman baths and the historic buildings made from bath stone. It's a small, idyllic city surrounded by hills and countryside. A great place to grow up. They loved being part of the local youth theater. So naturally, I had to ask, were they one of those typical theater kids?
It's really funny, this idea of like the annoying theater kids. Like, it's not something I was aware of as a teenager, and I think it's become a really big thing now on social media. And I like to imagine we were like less annoying than the stereotypical theater kids, but maybe we weren't. I don't know. But it kind of, yeah, it gave me, I guess, an identity in a lot of ways because I was a really awkward kid, very kind of shy. And so that gave me a lot of confidence.
Ariel wasn't just into theater. They were also an excellent student. They studied at Oxford and later Cambridge, two historic cities that felt a lot like their hometown. But eventually, Ariel moved to London, searching for the energy of a bigger city, a place where they could explore life outside of academics. London gave them the space to be themselves, but there was still one thing that they really wanted to try.
Doing stand-up has kind of been like a bucket list item for me for quite a few years. It was something I felt that if I got to my deathbed and I'd never tried it, I would almost certainly regret it. But I think until quite recently, the conditions were not right to try it. So before I moved to London, I was living in a very rural area and there were some like open mics and stuff around me. But I'm very glad I didn't try there because I think that audience would not have responded well to what I performed. So I've always, when I thought of doing stand-up, I always really struggled before with like, what kind of jokes am I going to tell? I felt very constrained by traditional formats. You know, I couldn't imagine myself telling lots of one-liners, but I've always really loved a kind of strand of surrealist and absurdist comedy. I don't know if you're familiar with the comedian Stuart Lee.
I'm not. Can you tell us what kind of comedy he does?
Yeah, so he's a British comedian who does very, very dry, very deadpan comedy that is very satirical and often kind of builds on quite absurd premises. So he did a whole comedy special where he, at the very beginning, he gets people to come up on stage and like pull party poppers and like dance about, and then he immediately just launches into talking about 9/11. And it's like a complete contrast, but it's actually like a real interesting balance between talking about really important experiences and then, you know, having jokes as well. So I kind of had an idea that I wanted to go more in that direction, but I was really stalling on doing anything with it, right? And one of the things I decided this year was I'm going to I think often if you tell people, oh, I want to do this thing, or I'm going to do this thing, it's really easy. You get the validation of imagining yourself doing it without actually doing it, right? So I said, okay, I'm not going to tell anyone. I'm just going to sign up for an open mic night. And then once I've done it, I can tell people I've done it. But until I do it, I'm going to keep silent about it, basically.
That sounds really smart.
Yeah, I was like, also, if I sign up for it, I'll have the accountability of like, I have to prepare something, right? And actually, it was only a 5 minute set, so that's like very doable. So I signed up for it. I asked my friend to come because most of these comedy nights, they do like bringer slots where you have to bring an audience member with you.
Ariel and his friend arrive at a traditional pub on the corner of a busy street in central London. The Artillery Arms, it's called. It's a cozy spot with wooden walls, low ceilings, and soft lighting. There are shiny brass taps at the bar, comfy chairs, and small corners to relax with a drink. It's a warm and friendly place with lots of history.
And then, I got upstairs to the performance space, and the actual lights I have here right now, they have the same light, the same microphone stand they have behind me there. I was like, oh, okay, so it's the first thing that shows up on Amazon when you look up like lights or mic stands. I was like, okay, so it's not too intimidating. The host came and introduced the night. It was like really, really friendly. And, he came on and did like a big, got the crowd going, told some jokes. But the focus of this night was like no heckling and be kind to the people trying their comedy. And, he asked questions to people to warm people up, but he only talked to audience members and not the comedians. So despite all that, I was feeling really nervous. I was actually a bit shaky. My stomach was quite unsettled. My friend, who I'd taken, is, let's say he's quite an enthusiastic drinker. He's what my parents might call a piss artist. Um, so he was like, "Oh, do you want a drink?" And I was like, "Okay, yeah, but I'll drink it slowly." So I had like a cider to kind of settle my stomach. So fortunately, I was performing in the second half, which normally I dislike. Normally I like performing as early as possible because otherwise when I'm watching everyone else, I'm just thinking about what I want to do, right? But in this case, I was like, I need time to like enter this space and feel comfortable. So the first, 4 or 5 comedians came and performed their sets, and I laughed a lot, which obviously releases a lot of endorphins. It's relaxing. But I noticed that everyone else's comedy was very jolly. It was very cheery. They were mostly talking about their life, kind of, I guess, what you could just call normal jokes. And it was very good, actually. Everyone was really good. But I slowly started to realize, like, oh, what I've prepared is very, very different, right? Because I'd kind of I'd been putting off writing this set for a long time. And then at just one point, this idea struck me. And it was this horrible, absurd, dark, twisted idea. But I was like, let me just write it down and see where it goes. And like, worked on it and rehearsed it quite a bit. I was like running through it on the train on the way over. But I realized that it was going to be quite a big risk. So during the break between the first and the second half, I switched to water. And, my friend had asked, like, oh, what is your set about? And I told him it was about child murder, which he was like, oh, okay.
Ariel's stand-up set wasn't your typical light comedy. It was about the tragic murder of 2-year-old Jamie Bulger in England, a case that shocked the nation in the 1990s. This was heavy stuff. As the second half of the comedy show begins, Ariel's turn is soon. The energy they got from laughing earlier in the night was gone, and now replaced by a rush of adrenaline. Their stomach is tightened. Their hands are shaking. Suddenly, applause fills the room as the comedian on stage finishes, and the host takes the mic.
So they announced me, I came up and I started my set. So I said, on the 12th of February 1993, two 10-year-old boys from the small town of Bootle, Merseyside, abducted a 2-year-old boy, Jamie Bolger, from a shopping centre. They tortured him. They murdered him. It was a shocking case. It was the youngest convicted murderers in British history. And at this point, I could see all the faces in the room, kind of a veil go over them of slightly nervous laughter and anticipation for what was going to come. Because everyone else had kind of just come up and started off with a little joke to kind of warm everyone up. And it was all, it was all launching right into it. Whereas I was really very deadpan and serious, kind of clutching the microphone. And then I said, and I just want to say that kids today Kids today are too anxious to engage in the physical touch necessary to strangle another child. They're too worried about the carbon emissions of throwing a body into a wood chipper. They're too busy transitioning to hook up a transistor to another child's nipples and electrocute them to death. And I just think it's a crying shame, because murder builds character. Now, fortunately, by this point, I did get some laughs. So I was very happy, because at that point of the set, I'd kind of resigned myself to the idea that if I don't get a laugh at the start, I probably am not going to get any laughs. But the only way I can leave this with any dignity is to just fully commit to what I'm saying, right? So fortunately, I did get laughs. Now, whether they were genuine laughs or nervous laughter of people who are kind of eyeing the door, I wasn't quite sure. But I pushed on. And actually, as it went, I got more confident. I kind of got some energy from the laughter. I'm pretty proud of some of the jokes I had in there. And what I actually realized as I was performing it was, yes, it was very dark humor. And I actually, strangely enough, there's a lot of dark comedy I don't like. I think there's a lot that's been overdone. When I was a teenager, there was a lot of really edgy comedy about dead babies and all that kind of stuff. And somehow I felt like, my dark comedy is different, right? Because I'm doing something a bit more obscure. I don't know. But what I realized was actually it was satire as well, because what I was really making fun of is the way that people talk about kids these days, right? And the ridiculous expectations of, back in my day, we were down in the coal mine, right? So that was what I was really making fun of. But obviously, with any kind of performance, you don't say the subtext out loud, right? So I had to fully commit to the dark side of it. But I got energy from the laughter, and I actually, despite having rehearsed it a lot, I kind of got a bit giddy, and I ended up having to get my phone out and check my notes once or twice. But I was able to kind of brush it off with I'm just sorry, I just love this topic so much. I get very passionate about it. And at one point, I made a little joke about, all the people in the room with children are probably trying to head for the door right now. I looked outside the window and said, there's a graveyard out there across the street. So overall, I didn't completely bomb. Now, when I got off stage, at that point, I still wasn't quite sure how much I had crossed the line, because there was still a part of me that thought, okay, they all laughed, but maybe I'll never get invited back here again. And the host came back on the mic and said, okay, yeah, that was different. And I thought, oh God, okay. Have I gone too far? Right? But afterwards, several other people came up to me and congratulated me on my set. And that was actually incredibly validating, because all of the other comedians I thought were really excellent. So to get praise from them was like, oh, it was such a feeling of recognition.
Ariel is euphoric. They did it. They had the courage to stand up, be seen, and share their voice. Afterward, as the comedians finish congratulating them, Ariel's friend walks over.
He absolutely loved it. He thought it was very clever. And as I had kind of realized as I was performing it, despite telling him roughly what it was about beforehand, he hadn't quite realized how far it was going to go.
And you've discovered, or you're just on this journey of bringing your unique edge or your unique self to different stages, right? Do you feel like no one could do that? Do you feel like it's very like a superpower that you have?
Yeah, that was really my takeaway at the end of the night was, oh, it's that real contrast. And Stuart Lee talks about it as the balance between the sacred and the profane, right? Like the holy and the unholy. Because in this comedy special I talked about, where he talks about 9/11, he recounts this story of he was in a bar in the south of Spain when it happened. And because of the history of Spain, you know, there are lots of Muslims in that part of the country. So he was saying that the atmosphere in the bar was very tense, but the atmosphere was completely broken when he accidentally farted. And then it was like they could all laugh hysterically over this shared human experience of farting, and it just completely broke all the tension, right? And I think there's like a beauty to that, of that darkness and strangeness can just cut through a lot of the walls we put between ourselves and other people.
Being brave enough to be strange, to be different, to not belong is one of the greatest acts of courage. You could do what everyone else does, but when you go your own way, when you decide to go left when everyone else is going right, when you choose to stand up while others are sitting down, that is where the most interesting things happen. It's also what makes you, your own unique fingerprint. Ariel Goodbody is a polyglot language teacher and a writer who creates stories about love, hidden fears, and challenging traditional ideas about gender. You can listen to their creative, often dark, and definitely beautiful stories to improve your English by visiting easystoriesinenglish.com or following the link in the show notes. If you're enjoying Into the Story, please take a moment to leave a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. Every review helps, and I really appreciate your love and support. And of course, make sure to click the follow button so that you never miss a new episode of the show. That's all for today, folks. Until next time, I hope that you have a good time, or at least a good story to tell.